Welcome back to another episode of Ready, Fire, Aim podcast. I'm your host, Thad Barnes, and today I'm here with a guy that I've had some conversations with around AI. It's interesting stuff. He's going a lot of different directions. He's doing really cool stuff. So, welcome to the program. Thanks for being here.
Great to be on the.
So, last time we talked, you were doing some interesting things around the idea of context with LLMs, like with ChatGPT and Gemini and Claude and all that kind of stuff. For those of us that have been in the AI world for a little while now or done any kind of prompting, we know that context is a problem. And it's often something that you see the large language models kind of tout. Like we have a 1 million, context window, 2 million context window, 200,000, all this kind of stuff. I know that you told me off the air that you kind of are not working on this anymore, but you have been. And I'm curious, what are your thoughts around context and how do we kind of solve that problem? Or is the idea of just building a bigger context window the solution?
I think that from my experience, we want to keep the right context, and it's not just about building a larger context window. That is going to happen over time, but it is going to approach a certain limit. And from my experience, even if you have a large context window and you haven't even gotten close to it, but you're sort of muddying that context window with bad context, that still sort of worsens the output that you get from AI. There's that. And then there's also the fact that even if you have the a very large context window, it's often like you're missing the right context that you want to give it, and you're trying to bring in context multiple times that you've already provided it. So that's kind of where I see problems with context. And there's also a lot of companies working on this. They're working on things like memory, but from my perspective, memory sort of loses a lot of nuance. So that's why I think context is really king. And it's the thing that you need to provide the full sort of nuanced context to get the output that you want from AI.
When you're dealing with that, like the way I view it is if you've got this long stream of consciousness basically in a context window and something you were talking about 20 minutes ago, 2 days ago, 2 hours ago, whatever the window is, you can come back to that chat anytime, but you were talking about something long time ago. How do you manage that when you want to tell AI, okay, we've had this conversation, but what we started with is not where we are now. We've iterated. So forget that stuff. Here's the bulk of what how do you manage that in a like in a just a simple, prompting window?
Exactly, right? That this is like the hard part where, you've had a long conversation, parts of that conversation are relevant and parts of it are no longer relevant. And I guess the best way that we have right now is to just pick the relevant parts, bring them into a new sort of fresh context window, and then only use those, and remove the irrelevant context parts. But unfortunately, that's nobody wants to do that. That's very difficult. It requires a lot of manual work, but that's the best solution, and that's sort of the problem that we were trying to solve with open context, where it'd be much easier to just delete the context that's no longer relevant, or bring in the context that is more relevant now from previously in the conversation to like a little bit closer. Pretty much nail the problem. That's like the hard part of context.
I've seen some people dealing with it using GitHub repositories. And so their prompts are very organized and strategic in the sense that it has, a certain part of the prompt will say, for information about this, refer to this GitHub repository. So in terms of business, like it could be business processes, business ICPs, different parts of the business services, and it just relates to all these GitHubs. So then you can change the GitHub information, but you never have to change your prompt or your context window because every prompt always refers the LLM. It's a long way to go to manage context, right?
Right.
You're managing GitHub repositories on top of it, but it's an interesting way to do it. And I can't think of a better way at the moment, other than like you said, just manually going through and removing, start a new chat window with a summary, and here's what we're going to talk about now. But isn't that the point of AI is to not have to deal with manual stuff like that?
Yeah, exactly. That's a great point. And I think the GitHub approach, it does work for certain things, but not for others. It doesn't, it's one of those things that doesn't fully maintain the nuance. And the LLM might not know where in the repository to look or anything like that, but it'll sort of, it won't maintain the entire context, and it'll do different strategies like RAG or other strategies to sort of condense that context to, to find what's relevant. And yeah, it does work for certain things, but when you're trying to do things that, let's say, are research related, or trying to write for about a specific thing, or trying to do coding where you want certain, you have certain expectations, then that's where I think it fails. Yeah, I think you're right. This is sort of the point of AI, where we don't want to have to deal with all of this, and it should sort of just go and learn, go and figure out what it needs. And then there's actually another company that's kind of interesting. I don't remember its name, but I met them at an event hosted by the University of Toronto. Aria, they were presenting there, and they're sort of trying to solve this problem in a unique way, where I think that might be the long-term approach of using reinforcement learning agents that sort of learn from data how to which context is relevant. And that's sort of the most, I think, theoretically AI aligned approach that I've seen, where it's based on the fundamentals of, hey, this is the point of AI should be able to do this. So how do we make it so that it actually achieves that objective, and we get to a point where it sort of figures out on its own that this is what I need to know. Yeah, it's sort of, I think it's pretty early stage for them as well.
And so many AI companies are getting venture capitalists interested, and they're raising huge amounts of money for a startup that's completely unproven, right? I mean, there's companies out there that have been around 2 months and are getting $60 million, you know,
Right.
funds
Yeah.
poured into them for an idea, for a concept, and they've done nothing. It's incredible.
Yeah, I think it's because of the potential. Because how do you value something that has so much potential, but at the same time is just getting started? And I think right now we're just looking at the potential side of it more than the risks. But times change, and at certain times we tend towards looking at the fundamentals or the risks. But at certain times we start looking at more the potential, and I think right now we're closer to looking at the potential than we are at just the risk, or the past achievements of the company.
Yeah, I mean, if you've only been around 60 days, there's really no past achievements. Although the founders and the people that have ideas have come from, they have a history, they have achievements on their own. So they've proven themselves, maybe not this concept yet. But when you're talking about building a platform, are you coding like old school coding? Are you vibe coding? I know open context is kind of on the back burner now, but when you're building that, are you vibe coding it, or are you doing it old school coding like with Python and all that?
So I guess vibe coding is a bit extreme for me. So I am definitely looking at the code. It's
Okay.
not, it's not that, I just let it code and let AI code and just not even think about it. But I do use AI to assist me a lot and sort of speed up my work. And I think most people who are already technical, that's sort of the route that they're going down, where they're no longer just coding on their own. They have an AI to assist them, but at the same time, because they already know and they sort of understand the limitations of AI so well, and it's much easier for us. I guess often it's much easier to just fix a problem ourselves that AI makes than to go and ask it to fix it. Even when I'm writing, for example, if I clean up my draft with AI and I see that it's done things I didn't want it to do, it's sometimes just easier for me to just go and fix that myself than to prompt it or keep prompting it over and over. And it's just the multiple cycles that you sometimes have to go through with AI. If you're doing it yourself, you could just do it once. So I guess the hybrid approach.
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting because what could have taken you a month to code in the past, 2 years ago, 18 months ago, now could take you 2 days, right? Because you can have AI help you and just iterate so much more quickly.
Yeah, exactly. One thing that I no longer have to, I guess, worry about as much, although there's some nuance to this, is some front end and design. So I was very bad at front end and design.
Me
And
too.
so I had
I
to, for my first startup, at least, I had to get help with that. And I no longer have to do that. And that just allows me to move much faster. But at the same time, often if I don't give it my soul and just, give like a very short prompt without a ton of context, without a ton of detail, then it's going to produce what looks very clearly like AI slop.
right.
So I don't know about you, but I can when I look at a website, I can see sometimes the exact parts that AI created, and I'm not sure why it is. I think it's because, the way that LLMs are trained, they're trained to like average out all that information that they have, and that's kind of the average that they've calculated on the internet. But you can sort of see that this looks like the average that AI produces, and the more deviation there is, the more human input there was to that. So I don't know. It's just I have to do that. I feel like for it to not look like AI slop, but yeah, it does help speed up quite a bit.
That you bring up an interesting point about prompts and context. Do you have kind of and I'm not asking you to give away your IP here, but do you kind of have a template, a standard way that you prompt, especially at the beginning? Like, a lot of people will say, this is your role, this is your task, this is expected outcome, and here's an example of an expected outcome. Do you kind of structure it like that, or are you even more detailed, or how do you handle that?
For me, I think giving examples works, but also one thing that I do that I think I don't know if a lot of people do is experiment with prompts. So for a specific task, I'll, with open context, with context OS, even though it's no longer a company that I'm building, it's a product that still exists and I still use it because for me, it helps me experiment with prompts. And I don't know how much people do branching of conversations. I do a ton of branching
Interesting.
because that doesn't just sort of help me not muddy the context window, but it also helps me experiment. That was my sort of main issue that I had that, I can't really properly experiment in other prompting environments with like a visual branching method. So essentially, I guess to summarize, I do two things. One is to give a ton of examples, and the second is to branch conversation and experiment a lot.
So on your platform that you still use but isn't publicly available for us poor folk, how
But it
would
is
you
publicly
recommend?
available. I'm
Oh, is
sorry.
it?
Yeah, it
Okay.
is publicly available, but I'm just no longer, I guess, maintaining or building it further.
Oh, okay. So there's not really a good way to branch conversations and experiment like that. Like if I just went to Claude and I
Right.
wanted to use, Sonnet 4.5 or something and I wanted to talk code, there's really no way to branch that conversation, right?
Yeah, in certain, I guess it is possible, especially in certain environments.
Okay.
And more recently, it is now possible. So I've seen it in ChatGPT, I've seen it in AI Studio. I don't know about the others. Those are the ones that I've mostly used. But in these ones, what happens is that it sort of creates a new chat in the same environment. And so because those chats are all still sorted by, whenever you use them last, and they're not sort of the same sort of original chat isn't doesn't share one chat in the environment, then it just sort of, for me at least, makes it much easier to figure out where each branch is coming from. How do I go back to the original? Where do sort of like the entire visual of the context? Where does each conversation sort of go to, stuff like that. Um, that just makes it much easier to navigate the branches. But branching itself is technically possible in these other environments.
Yeah. Okay. It's 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 interesting to me that it's coming so far, like, and I know that you're a true developer, but I've been doing tons of vibe coding for quite a while now, almost 2 years now. And I'm seeing platforms like Replit, they've come leaps and bounds just in the last 2 to 3 months in terms of being able
Right.
to use just discussion chat language like we are right now, rather than these really detailed, organized prompting. I remember just even last summer, I was trying to build an app for, what's for dinner tonight? Remember what we've built, what we've cooked in the last week. Don't give me too much of the same thing. Use different, it was this huge thing. It was a big problem. Prompting was a problem. Getting it to a polished product it was ridiculous. Now I built 2 apps in the last 5 days that are highly polished, ready to send out to clients, and I use simple language. So
Yeah.
I think branching and iteration is important, but for me, I'm not a highly technical developer like you, but using actual simple language like they've been talking about for 18 months, it's coming to fruition. Are you seeing that a little bit too in what you're doing?
Yeah, exactly. I think especially in November with the release of Gemini 3, I think that there was a massive sort of leap up at that point. And that's where I also sort of felt like I no longer had to worry about front end and UI anymore. I think lots of people also at that point started worrying about their jobs. Like, oh, this is, this is a lot more progress all of a sudden than I was expecting. So yeah, for sure, I think in that time frame there has been massive amounts of progress. And recently, I don't know if you know about Theo, but it's this. It's somebody who's very well known in the software engineering circle. He was also talking about the CEO of Claude and his prediction about AI coding and how it sort of almost turned out to be correct. He predicted a while back that, within 3 months, AI would write like 90% of code. And then most people thought that was absurd, that was not going to happen. And he was kind of wrong about the timeline, but it is sort of starting to happen now. It's been, I think, 9 to 12 months since then, and now it feels like it is able to write about 90% of code, and then that 10%, whoever wants to go and do those original that additional 10%, they are able to do that. But yeah, for sure, over the past 3 months, it's been very, very rapid progress, and then I don't know what's coming over the next 3 months.
We used to talk in terms of a year. When AI first started, it was where's it going to be next year? And you make a great point. Where's it going to be next month? In 3 months? It's advancing so quickly. What do you think is kind of the next thing, right? I mean, you can write code, but what about other things that people are doing with AI? I mean, I know your world is code, but what do you think is kind of next in terms of that big leap?
I know that I know what Jensen wants to see next. Jensen Huang, CEO of NVIDIA. A lot of people, including Jensen, and it used to be me as well, thought that robotics would follow soon after. Robotics and physical AI. Um, but it didn't happen as quickly as I guess we thought. We thought a lot of people thought that 2024 would be the year of AI powered robotics, the physical AI, and now we're entering 2026, and it's sort of not at the forefront anymore. So kind of hope to see physical AI, I guess, progress further. It's not something that a lot of people are looking at, but especially people who I guess are close to AI do want to see that progress a lot further because there's a lot more room for that to grow than from where it is right now. But it is a lot more difficult because it doesn't have the same sort of internet scale data. And then there's also, I guess, a consensus developing that with LLMs we've sort of reached their potential or almost reached their potential, and we're not going to get to general intelligence with the current sort of framework that we have with LLMs. We're going to need something that understands world models. This is also why Meta's chief AI scientist left the company. I don't know if you had a chance to see that news, but a lot of sort of the original AI pioneers, Jan LeCun, and also OpenAI's former, I guess, He was their chief scientist, I think, or something like that. Also, sort of left to start his own company for the same sort of goal of doing more research now and sort of being back to the fundamental research rather than just continuing to grow the models and grow the data that we ingest into the models. That seems to have reached its limit. But over the last 3 months, it seems like that wasn't really the case. But maybe I think it'll start to be more the case going forward. And we're going to see more fundamental research. So let's see.
Yeah, it's interesting when like you mentioned, these guys leave, these top AI scientists, because they're scientists. They're not business people. They're not interested in that. And when you're part of a huge company like Meta or Google, you have to kind of toe the company line, right? There's money behind it and there's a specific goal in mind and you've got to get them there. So there doesn't leave room for a lot of experimentation. It's like this is the next product. This is how we want to monetize AI. Go there and that's it. And these guys, a lot of them, they want to iterate quickly. They want to, what's the next thing? What's the next thing? They don't want to spend a year building something because AI is
Yeah.
moving way faster than that now.
Yeah, for sure. I'm also seeing a ton of, I guess in terms of application, I'm seeing this more from startups than I am from larger companies, at least at this point. But a ton of startups getting funded that are doing some very, very interesting things in almost every industry and trying to make every industry modern and, fundamentally built differently with AI in mind. So I'm seeing this from startups and they're getting funded and I think they're making progress, but ultimately it'll also depend on sort of the users of that technology and whether how fast they choose to adopt it. And also I think it sort of still has fundamental limitations that we're gonna be trying to figure out and work around over the next few years. But that's something that I can't wait to see more of. More startups, building real applications.
So around that, you mentioned open context is kind of shuttered in terms of new development. What's next for Jazib?
I guess another startup that is working on an application for a real world application for AI. So basically, for me, the problem that I'm trying to solve is when I was building my first company, so this is my fourth now, I guess. We were looking for events that we should attend to find our ideal customers. And often I would find out about it through my competitors. They'd post about those events after attending that, hey, these are the pictures of that event we attended. We had met all these customers. So this was a startup in the real estate industry. And so they'd find a bunch of real estate events everywhere in Canada. They had sort of, people full time on that, finding events and being essentially everywhere at every real estate event, meeting essentially every property manager out there. And for me, it was much harder because I was almost a solo startup. I had some people helping me a little bit, but I was essentially the only person full time. And I didn't know the industry that well either. So I didn't know, where the events were happening. And these events were everywhere. They weren't just on like one website. And I was busy with a bunch of other stuff. So I wouldn't find out about them. And sometimes I tried to register and I was too late. And so this was a huge problem for me then. And then for the second one, that was in the sort of influencer space. I missed a bunch of events there that I didn't realize were happening with, influencers and founders connecting.
Mhm.
So now I'm trying to solve this problem and building something called Scouty, where it sends you a notification when there's an event that you should attend for your startup or, for your business or for whatever that you're building. If there's an event happening for it, then it'll send you a message on WhatsApp that, hey, I found this event. I'm just continuously monitoring events everywhere online. I found this. You should probably attend for this reason. Then, you could just click on that and sign up for the event. So you don't have to, it sort of takes away that mental load and time of searching for the right events that you should attend and helps you sort of also find and meet in person your ICPs, your ideal customers and investors or, whoever else that you want to connect. because I'm personally a strong believer in in-person connection. And one of the things that I've realized over the past few months of building my own startup and being in the founder community is that I love working with founders and people are just building stuff. So I feel like this is perfect for me because the sort of the ideal customer profile is founders for this. Founders and anyone who's building stuff, whether it's a startup, a brand, or anything else, and they want to meet people. I think it would be great if there's something that helps them find the events where they can meet the right people.
Sounds to me like a really good adaptation of the service we met on, which is called Borty.
Right, exactly. That's why there's some similarities in the name as well. It's
Okay, yeah, makes sense.
something that I personally love a lot. I've talked about Bordy to so many people, mentioned it on my Substack as well, and they're brilliant marketing. So I personally love Bordy, but I feel like it has the limitations of being online. This is sort of extending Bordy to the physical world and helping people meet through physical events. A lot of connections that Bordy made for me, they never really led to anything because the person never really got to even see me.
Yeah.
And so this is sort of, you know, allowing people to take the final step of meeting people themselves, but putting them in the opportunities in the right space where they can meet people, where there are going to be people that should meet each other, would benefit from each other.
And I like the idea that it can scrape events, right? So Bordy just has its own database. But if what you're doing with Scouty, I can tell it, here's what I'm looking for, here's where I live, here's the area I'm willing to drive to, I love the idea that it can just go out and find. I don't need to go to events.com and then alignable and then this site and then it can do all of that for me and find everything that's going on anywhere near me.
Exactly. And even if it's not near you, but you're willing to sort of fly out to that area, at certain times I have been willing to go depending on, how much of a impact that event would have. So there was this real estate conference happening in BC that would bring in essentially thousands of property managers from everywhere, and it could have led to thousands and thousands of dollars in revenue, in recurring revenue for us. And so for me, it would have been worth it to attend that conference, but I missed it because I didn't realize there was this event happening. I was new to the industry. And so when I found out about it, it was already too late to sign up. So at certain times, you want to be able to go elsewhere as well. And you can tell it that, hey, these are the conditions where I'm willing to go elsewhere. Um, and it can recommend events anywhere in that case. Luma, for instance, sends notifications of all the events happening in a certain city. So there was this one point where I was thinking of visiting SF. And so I signed up to the events that were happening in SF. So I would sort of find the optimal time to go and meet the investors there, founders there. But it just sends me all the events that are happening in SF and specifically in SF. I can't ask it that, hey, can you just send me notifications for the events that would make sense for me and not just, random events that are unrelated and I can't really I don't know if I want to fly out for those events. Can you just
Right.
tell me when there's something that is happening that would be significant enough that I should and it just doesn't have, I guess, that capability. And I sort of want to sometimes be able to say that, hey, not just SF, maybe, around SF where there's a drivable area. I just, fly there once and I can visit any event in that area. I can't really customize those notifications in any way. So that's sort of a problem that I'm hoping to solve.
hmm are you again, I never want to give away your ICP, but I'm curious how your or your IP. I'm curious how you scrape data. Are you using something like Firecrawl or browserless AI, or how do you kind of build that back end? If you don't mind talking about the nuts and bolts a little bit.
So I started working on this yesterday, and
Oh,
so
okay.
that's something that I have not decided yet, but we'll do in a relatively short period of time. Even our website is not live yet. Our landing page It should be live by the end of today, but that those are details that we'll have to figure out. It's going to require a reasonable amount of engineering effort to make sure that we're not burning through billions of tokens for simple requests, because there's going to be events happening. Well, first of all, even the fact that we have to essentially constantly know every event that's happening in a, at least in a continent, let's say North America, we have to know every event that's happening, and they're spread out across so many websites. And often they're not even on any event website, they're just on their own website.
Right.
So even that itself is like a bit of a engineering challenge that we'll have to figure out. And then there's the problem of, okay, every time there's an event coming in, we don't want to, ask an AI for every single person that we have, every single event notification request that they have, they can you check whether this event matches for that person. That would burn through an insane amount of tokens
Yeah.
that are not cheap. So we have to figure out ways to still solve that problem, but not make it super, super expensive.
Yeah, that is a very interesting problem. I have a friend who's building an app that essentially just searches one city for local music events. So he doesn't have that problem of burning through tokens because he's not searching the entire continent, right? Yeah, you bring up a really good point, and I'll be interested to hear from you, how you solve that problem because even though a million tokens might only cost you a few dollars, if you're spending that every 10 minutes, that really adds up quickly.
Right, exactly. Especially if the database of users grows quickly, as I'm hoping it does in the success scenario, it'll just become very, very expensive to have a service like this. And we don't want it to be expensive for founders either, because founders often can't afford to pay that much. So it needs to be very, very affordable.
Yeah.
20, 30 bucks a month at most, pr- more likely closer to 10, $5 a month. But let's see what we can get it down to. Yeah, it's just it's gonna be interesting problems. These engineering problems, these are gonna be fun problems to solve. And what's great is that, I think AI sort of liberates us from working on uh the smaller problems to working on these more interesting, more complicated, bigger problems. So that's gonna be fun.
And it's cool. You brought up your website should be live, probably by tomorrow. And literally you started this project yesterday. And in the past, you could do that, but you would spend the full, 18, 20 hours of your working day getting that website up. Now you'll probably spend 20 or 30 minutes. You just won't get to it until later today because you got other stuff you want to do. But you could do it in less than an hour with AI now and have a functioning website. And within a week, probably have a functioning MVP of an app, right? Where it would take you months to get there, even 2 years ago.
Right. And now sort of the challenge becomes not only this engineering challenge which I talked about, we are going to work on that, but at the same time, the distribution, we can build now, we can build faster, but it's also a lot more competitive because a lot more people are building faster. So how do we employ our human creativity to figure out ways that, that work for distribution? Because that's a lot harder now. Everyone is finding the ways that work, and then everyone is using it. And once everyone uses it, it stops working for anyone.
Right.
So, you essentially sort of have to keep improving, keep staying on top of what's working, and just bring out as much of your creativity as possible. On LinkedIn, for example, a lot of people are using that channel for distribution. Some things that worked 3 months ago for a lot of people are no longer going to work today. So we have to find new strategies. People were using, certain structures or hooks to grab attention, and now those are not going to work because everyone's using those same sort of
Mhm.
hooks to grab attention. But we have to, whoever is sort of the most creative, they're going to, grab attention, and they're going to grab a slice of, I guess, the moment.
Yeah, much more quickly. We in psychology, it's called habituation, and it applies to anything, right? If you buy a house or you rent an apartment at the end of the runway at your airport, the planes are going to drive you crazy going over your house every 20 minutes for a few months. And then pretty soon you won't even hear them. You won't even notice it. The same thing happens like you're talking about. You'll notice something that stands out on LinkedIn. Oh my gosh, wow. And you want to read that. But if you see that exact same format for the next couple of weeks, pretty soon it's not interesting to you. So you make a great point that, and that's a lot of what we talk about. And that's the whole point of Ready, Fire, Aim is right. If you wait for perfect, that will kill your momentum. You've got to just get it out there, iterate, try. And when you find that thing that works, use it, but you've got to continually try the next thing too and get feedback and figure out what's working now because it will change. And with AI, it changes rapidly.
Yeah, exactly. And people are gonna have to adapt to this. I think people are gonna have to adapt to not doing the same thing for too long, and that's gonna be difficult for a lot of people to adapt to. We were used to, having sort of a similar job for many, many years, and that's no longer gonna be the case. But at the same time, I think that sort of means that I don't know if society is improving that much, but at least on the margin, there are gonna be improvements that are happening. So, for example, if you go back like 10 or 15 years, uh, and just look at YouTube, the quality of content on that platform just wasn't anywhere close to what we have right now, and it's free. It's completely, you have a ton of ads, and you could just for $10 a month, you can get rid of those ads too. But because of all that competition, sort of everyone had to keep improving to grab attention. And now the bar is just very, very high to get in. And that's just for as a consumer, that means that, you have access to a lot more high quality content.
Yeah, it's interesting. We hear of people like Mr. Beast, right? And he understands YouTube like practically nobody else. I mean, I don't think even the engineers that build the platform understand the algorithm as well as he does and the changes because he's constantly iterating. He's constantly coming out with new content ideas, testing them. Now he's got the name where if he just puts his name on something, it gets views, but that doesn't slow him down. He's still testing, he's still iterating, he's still constantly moving. And it's an interesting thing that the principles of marketing, right? You talked about LinkedIn as a content delivery platform and distribution platform, but the principles of marketing a product, whether it's a service or a software or a physical product, the foundation is still the same, but how we present that changes rapidly now. It used to be, like you mentioned, you could run Facebook ads for a year. Once you kind of figured out where your target audience was and how to detail target them, you could run the same kind of hook with different visuals for a year. Now you can't do that. You're like you mentioned, couple months maybe.
Yeah, exactly. Even you mentioned Facebook ads. Even I'm not on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, but the ads that I see on Instagram, they've just evolved so much, even in the past year.
Yeah.
And it's like often you can't tell that this is an ad. It's just another reel on Instagram, for example.
Yeah.
And that's just insane because everyone's trying to grab attention. And so the marketing landscape is just evolving very, very rapidly.
Yeah. It's a problem, but it's an interesting one to solve. And I really like the idea of Scouty, right? Because everybody's putting out content. Everybody's got an event. I mean, there's a gajillion events just in my little city of Reno every year. And I don't know which ones to go to. And I don't even know three-quarters of the ones that are out there. So I see Scouty as something that not only can you have it scrape and I can have it look for specific things that are relevant to me, but I see it as a platform that could be where event planners want their content and make sure that Scouty grabs it, right? Because as it grows, they're going to know people are using Scouty and I got to make sure my event is there.
Yeah, exactly. It sort of becomes a distribution channel for them. They want to make sure it's there. For us, we want to make sure it's there as well because we want to make sure that the founders that we have in our network, they don't miss an important event that they should have gone to. And then founders also, it's also in their incentive to make sure that every event gets seen by Scouty and filtered in the right way. It's gonna take some time to learn as well. I don't think it's gonna be perfect in the first couple of stages, but it's gonna evolve and it's gonna improve rapidly, and we're gonna find ways to scrape every single event on the internet.
Well, and you could spend weeks putting in all the things that you think are awesome and you think would be helpful to you, and that's good. But the real iteration will come when you start getting users on the platform that are not you, right? Because they'll tell you, can you make it do this? What if it did that? And you'll get all kinds of great ideas. Some you'll use, some you won't. But that's where the true power will come in, is when you start getting users and they'll tell you what they want.
Yeah, this is why I think learning and launching fast is so powerful. Launching fast and killing bad ideas or bad decisions or whatever it is that isn't working. And this is why I sort of love that process because I can think certain things, but ultimately it's the user who, it's the markets, the masses of people who decide whether or not what I'm saying is, actually something that they want. But I think, this is sort of the core philosophy behind the way I'm approaching startup founding, which is you need to build and launch as quickly as possible. And I think one of the problems actually that even though a lot of people know that they should do this, one of the reasons why they don't do this is a fear of embarrassment, of public failure. People want to perfect whatever it is that they're putting out because it has their own image attached to it. And I think, this is one of the topics I actually also talked about in my new YouTube channel. But I think we need to figure out ways to get over that fear because it is. I've even seen it this morning on somebody's LinkedIn post that in 2025, among there were a ton of good things that happened, but there was also a ton of bad things. And their realization was that one of the reasons that they didn't go as far as they could have was that they had this fear of public embarrassment.
Mm.
Mm. And so I don't know who said it, but the first version of whatever you're putting out, it should probably be a bit embarrassing. Otherwise, you've spent too long building it.
That's a
It was
great
a
point.
lesson I also learned in my first startup, and then I just some lessons are worth it. Some lessons are very very valuable. So I'm very glad I sort of take this approach now.
Yeah. The obstacle is the path, right? If you look for the path of least resistance, you don't learn, you don't grow. I didn't invent that saying, somebody much smarter than me did, but if you push through the problems and learn from them, that's where real growth happens.
Exactly. I think that's been true for all founders. Every founder, everyone's who ever built something, whatever it is that they built, it's been true for every single one of them. Even I've been recently looking into for one of the startups I've had a discussion with into brands and you know fashion brands and their sort of journey, and I think they also have some very similar, I think, problems that they have to solve, similar things that they have to overcome that I didn't realize before. And one of them is sort of the same thing that you said. The obstacle is where you're sort of actually making progress. It is the path.
It is, and you can look to well-known entrepreneurs for more examples of this, right? For one that comes to mind is Elon Musk. Almost every company he's ever built was on the verge of failure and bankruptcy. Like Tesla, I think he famously said Tesla was like 3 months away from bankruptcy if they didn't figure out the Model 3. And SpaceX was one failed test away from closing its doors, but they got that final test off and then they got funding. And, you can see countless examples of that, of where they made poor decisions. They had to push through the failures to get to success. It's just time and time again proven to be the case, is that if you try the easy path, you might get a small win, but long term, it will never work. You won't.
Right. It is the filter, right? It is the filter that sort of holds a ton of people back, but also it's the reason why, there's a ton of people who are vastly successful
Yeah.
because they've gone through the filter.
Yeah, they've gone through the fire. They've taken their licks and they've learned.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Well, Jazib, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you. I want to do this again. We need to do another show in a few months and kind of see where Scouty's at the time, or if you're working on something new.
Sounds good. It's been great chatting with you. This was a very fun conversation. And I'm looking forward to hopefully being back whenever it is in a few months. Hopefully by then, Scouty is still the thing that I'm working on, and it'll be this podcast will be a great moment to look back at because it'll be essentially the first full time day that I worked on the project, and it's made a ton of progress since then. So let's see where it goes, but I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to being back.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that too. And by the time this episode drops, we'll have the link to Scouty down there. If you're interested in having people connect with you on LinkedIn, can we share your LinkedIn URL as well in the description below?
Yeah, for sure. We
Cool.
can share the LinkedIn. I also have a new YouTube channel now, so we
Yes.
can share that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you tell people what it's called so they can search, and then we'll also put a link below?
Yeah, sure. It's called Founder Jazib. So
Founder
founder
Jazib.
and my first name, Jazib.
You got it. All right. Yeah. Please, everyone, go check that out. And Jazib, be well. Keep doing what you're doing, and we'll definitely have you back on in a few months and see where you're at.
Sounds good. And you as well,
All right.
Thad.
Thank you.
Take care.